Lord Coe there was talking about the returned trust, which I think really nicely leads us into our first panel, which is talking about governance in sport, an oxymoron. There's been so many scandals in the governance of sport over the last couple of years, and we've brought together a panel of people right at the heart of it, politician, and a couple of leading administrators, to talk about the issues that have come up with governance in sport. So I'd like you to welcome to the stage our panel, Ed Warner, Chairman of UK Athletics, Damien Collins, Member of Parliament for Folkestone and Hythe, and Member of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, and Jane Purden, Head of Governance at UK Sport. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Jane, we've just heard from Lord Coe there. Yeah. He's in the business of restoring trust. Yeah. Can it be restored?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the short answer to the question, is sports governance an oxymoron? No, it's not. There are many sporting organisations, certainly nationally, which is the sector UK Sport Funds, who do a very good job with their sports governance. And I think they have some important lessons to teach people. I think Lord Coe made a great point, and it's something we've thought about as well, when he said it's not just about getting the structures right, you have to transform the culture of an organisation. So we, with our sister sports councils, particularly Sport England, are currently in the process of drafting something called the Governance Code for Sport in the United Kingdom. We've undertaken this at the request of government, who want it to be the gold standard for sports governance. And we're making progress with it. But again, in a lot of the research and consultation and feedback we've gathered, people have made exactly this point. So there's good work out there. Don't let the narrative from FIFA or IAAF, as was, dominate the entire narrative about sports governance.
Ed, that's a really interesting point. We do tend to view this, and I blame myself in newspapers as much, as a problem of overseas. It's corruption. FIFA is all about corruption in Africa, and IAAF is all about corruption in Asia. Are we being complacent about our own sporting governance?
I don't think we are on the corruption front, but we shouldn't be complacent about standards of governance, quality of oversight of sport. And for me, the most important thing is that spectators trust what they see on the field of play. So football's often cited in this regard, isn't it? People engage with the World Cup, they believe what they see on the pitch, 22 players, hammering it out, playing great football, even though they might hear about FIFA if they bother reading those parts of the sports section and raise their eyes. They don't trust FIFA, but they trust the World Cup. And when it comes to governance of sport in the UK, I think the most important thing that we can do is ensure that spectators can trust what they see in the field of play that we're responsible for, and that as organisations we are fit for purpose. It's a cliche, and what is that purpose? It's to grow the sport, to develop it, to ensure that it's healthy, that young people come into it, thrive in it, spectators engage with it. And there is a danger that we could get into a sort of analysis paralysis on governance, where we layer ourselves up with all sorts of different oversight structures, and as a consequence we end up running a moribund sport. I don't just mean athletics, I just mean generally we could be tied up in the knots of governance structure. So I don't think there's a corruption problem. There may well be a challenge to a lot of sporting bodies in the UK and globally, that they're not agile enough, smart enough to deal with the challenge of changing consumer habits, the way in which young people engage with the world and with sport. And we can't afford to end up being a bunch of pale male, stale people overseeing a sport which actually is all about young people and growth for the future, and change is a key part of that. And do we have governing bodies that are capable of changing and are working with changing environments?
Damien, you're a member of the Culture, Media and Sport Select Committee, and we've seen you giving fairly ferocious grilling to people coming in front of you. Do you think there's more part that government can play in the governance of sport, or should you be stepping back?
No, there is a role for governments. I think if you look at the scandals that have affected FIFA and the IAAF, what you've realised there is that criminality fraudulent activity is a criminal matter. It's not a matter for sport to manage discreetly. Certainly people in FIFA who might have thought that whatever went on within the FIFA family was a matter for it have discovered that it's not. That there are criminal investigations led by the FBI, led by the Swiss authorities, led against DIAC in athletics by the French criminal investigatory authorities. So it is a matter of law and the enforcement of law, and governments are responsible for that. And I think the government in this country is right to say we should expect that sports that receive public funding should meet very high standards in terms of their own governance, should be able to account for how they use that money, and there should be transparency in the way they run and organise their sports. And if not, they shouldn't receive that public funding. So the government has a strategic interest there too. And I think the government has a role in looking at, if you look at the ownership structures for sports clubs and football clubs, for example, to say, are we certain that fit and proper people are being allowed to run these clubs in a decent way? I think the government has a role in setting the legal framework for these issues and demanding high standards from the sports themselves. And I think also asking the question of commercial partners and sponsors of major sports, are you content that you're working with an organisation that is above board? Or are you giving money to an organisation that is corrupt? In which case, what questions does that raise about your integrity as a business and an organisation?
Well, we heard yesterday from John Whittingdale that the government is thinking that it may not give public money to the FA because of the way it's organised, not simply because it's proving to be corrupt or anything. It's just it's not very well organised. I mean, is that government's role?
Well, if the government's money, the public money, is being used for the public good, and I suppose what is the public money is used in sport to promote not just the elite level of sport in terms of the quality of British athletes competing at Olympic Games and World Championships, but also to increase participation in sport. We want to be certain that money is being used well, and that the governing bodies of those sports are able to appeal to the great breadth of people that wish to be engaged in. They represent different interests, different opinions, different backgrounds within the nation that reflect the breadth of the sporting community. And if a governing body can't demonstrate that it is using the resources given to it by the public through the government in a proper way, that the government should withdraw the funding from that governing body and use that money for sport still, but in a different way. And I think that is absolutely legitimate. I think when we get into the question about, say, football club ownership, which has been a big issue that the Select Committee has looked at over the last few years, I think changes in UK company law are helpful there as well to make sure that people who own football clubs can't hide behind brass plaques of dummy companies in the Cayman Islands and the Virgin Islands, and the people that support that football club have no idea who the owners are. There are all sorts of good reasons, not just in terms of financial transparency, but really the integrity of the business model of the club, why we should know that, and the government can play a role in setting the law in the land here, and then making sure that then is applied in sport as it is in other areas.
Jane.
I just want to come back on two things there, and actually the first one I want to come back on is disclosure of ownership of football clubs, because in my previous role at the Premier League, we made sure that the clubs did and do fully disclose their ownership all the way up to the ultimate beneficial owner.
But you only did that after there'd been numerous problems. It's kind of reactive governance.
It was
isn't
reactive,
it?
but we did it before the UK government did, and I was there when the government announced it. I kind of took a moment to say, you know what, it's nice in football to have been ahead of the curve in governance terms, because we sometimes get such a bad thing.
It happened after Richard Scudamore and Sir Dave Richards came in front of the Select Committee and were asked at the time, if Leeds United get promoted, and at that time Leeds had an ownership model where no one knew who the owner was, would you accept it? And after that session, the Premier League then, I think, spoke to Leeds United and said, you need to declare who your owner is, or you can't come up.
We'd had the rules. Anyway, let's not argue that. The other one I wanted to just come back on is I think what Damien says about protecting public money is absolutely right, and that is our role. We are the agency which distributes quite substantial funds due to the extreme generosity of the lottery players and the taxpayers of this country. And it's absolutely right. We must protect that investment and make sure that the recipients of it are fit for purpose. But I think there's another side to it as well, that it's an opportunity, and we should use that funding to leverage certain things out of it. Of course, elite sporting excellence, which is why UK Sport distributes our funding. Also participation, which is what our sister sports councils distribute their funding for. But there's an opportunity also to say to sports, you're good, as I say, sports governance in this sector in this country is good, but let's make it great. So it's not just about being the watchdog, being the eyes, being the big kind of quasi-regulator. It's also using these substantial funds that we have to really make our sporting organisations exceptional.
Ed, can you just give us some practical insight into what life has been like at UK Athletics during this period of turbulence in your international sport, with both governance and drug issues? Has it affected you practically? Have you been unable to get sponsors and that kind of thing?
It clearly makes the sponsorship market a lot more difficult. So I'm delighted that Seb's got some global partners coming down the pipes for the IAAF, because that clearly opens the way out for domestic sponsorship conversations. I think the biggest challenge for me has been around doping specifically, rather than corruption within the old IAAF hierarchy. And it's athletes themselves questioning the playing field how level it is that they're operating on. And it's the sort of general feedback you get from spectators, people who engage with the sport, that is it something that they can trust? So you have a significant challenge to persuade people that they want to be there, that they want to engage with the sport still, whether that's turning up on the track as a youngster and going through your drills, or whether it's going in the stadium and watching, or whether it's turning on the television for Rio. So for me, Rio is a massive watershed moment for athletics. And Olympic sport more generally. We know the challenges of the local organising committee. We know ticket sales are weak thus far, but the Brazilians always buy late, allegedly, so we're going to have to wait to see. But we need to see great sporting contests in a full stadium, well presented on television, with the story not being about drugs cheats, but about what people are watching. And for me, there is a divorce between, let's say, the section of the sports reports in your newspaper and others that relate to governance, corruption, doping, and the majority of the paper which reports what happens on the field of play, whether it's in Premier League football, whether it's an indoor World Athletics Championships. And the vast majority of people watching sport, that's what they're interested in, the sport. But clearly there's a leakage from one to the other. The more, open The Guardian today, a sort of full page about possible corruption in the Tokyo Olympic bid, and that will eat away at people's consciousness. So the challenge that we've had is, in a way, sort of keeping the publicity show on the road. We've got a World Championships coming here next year. In fact, we have two. We've got the IPC World Athletics Championships as well as the IAAF. We're aiming to have a full stadium for 18 days of athletics in the Olympic Stadium. And we're on sale tickets now to the athletics family, if you like, members of clubs and so on, but we go on public sale during the Olympics. So again, it all comes to this crescendo of what does the Olympics look and feel like? And whether Russian athletes are there or not, Seb and his team will make the right decision, I'm sure, when it comes to that. But we don't want in Rio the story being that the Russians are either there or not there. We want it to be Mo Farah going out and defending his Olympic titles. We want it to be British athletes competing with the world's best in the heptathlon, hopefully winning medals. We want Bolt remaining preeminent in world sprinting, or if he's beaten by an athlete that's never been banned, and people talk about the next generation. If all that happens, ultimately the sport will be fine, because all these other things are falling into place. The IAAF is sorting itself out. It takes time. But what we can't afford is for the summer of athletics to be a flop. I don't believe it will be, but a lot rides on events on the other side of the world in August.
Damien, watching from the outside, is there anyone who does it right? Do you think there's any sporting governance that, they're doing all right?
Well, I think there are some sports that seem to be. I think what are the criteria for it being done correct? I think that is, you've got a sports governing body which is growing participation in the sport around the world, that looks after the interests and the health of its athletes and competitors, and that has good governance in the sense that it is clear how it uses its money and it's transparent, and there are checks and balances on the senior executives within that sport. I think the problems are quite easy to identify, where you have sports where they were run by very powerful presidents and executive committees over whom there was virtually no external scrutiny at all, and there was no ethics committee, and nowhere you could go if you're a whistleblower to raise a complaint and have it taken seriously. There was no independence. Now I think there are some sports. I think hopefully all sports are moving now towards that. And there's some more successfully than others, but I certainly think as a topical sport, looking at the success of the Rugby World Cup and Premiership Rugby in England, I certainly think that rugby is a sport that is heading in the right direction, and there are other sports too. But I don't think this is a question of saying that sport is good, that sport is bad. I think we know what good governance looks like, and there are lots of shades of grey. So we want people to move towards higher standards. And I think that the Prime Minister's Anti-Corruption Summit in London today is going to look at corruption within sport as well as in other areas of business life. And I think it's the job of governments around the world to support sports organisations in moving towards better governance structures.
Jane, isn't the heart of this who we're governing for? When someone takes control of a football club, for instance, what are they doing it for? Now, we as fans looking at that sport may think that the owner of Manchester United is simply doing it to make money, whereas the fans would hope that they're trying to make it the team on the pitch. Isn't there fundamentally a problem that we all have different ideas of what good governance looks like?
Well, I think that whatever the sporting organisation, whether it's one of the most successful football clubs in Europe or whether it's a small British governing body perhaps for a tiny Paralympic sport, or whether it's an international federation, that there is a common theme. They are all guardians of something that's very special and very precious to people. And their directors, presidents, CEOs, chairmen, they're not quite akin to the directors, for example, of a PLC. There's great similarities, and you can take some of the corporate governance requirements from the corporate world and put them into sport. But that role of looking after a range of stakeholders who aren't just investing shareholders looking for a financial return, they're there for a variety of reasons, some of which you've touched on. They're fans, they want to see their team do well. They're participants, they want the opportunity to take part in a clean and safe sport. So the stakeholder kind of map and landscape of a sporting body is diverse, if you like, and the board, the people who run that organisation have to fully take account of that and realise what their responsibilities are and make sure that their stakeholders are looked after. I do think, you won't be surprised to hear me say this with the Premier League background, I never personally had a problem with the kind of pretty pure capitalist model of English football in this country, and the ownership model. It hasn't, on the whole, served English football badly, but it was noticeable in the 10 years that I was at the Premier League that we started with, when I started, there were very few rules about how clubs should operate with regard to their finances, who could be on their boards, public disclosure of ownership, that kind of thing. By the time I left, all those rules were in place. And so I think there was a growing recognition that yes, sport runs sport, but it does need a bit of a hand, be that from a regulator or a governance code such as the one we're writing, to say within certain limits and sensible boundaries.
I'm not sure that fans of Leeds, Charlton, Portsmouth, etc. would necessarily agree that all the clubs are being well run. Some of the ones, Charlton and Leeds, they weren't, the issues there didn't affect me when I was in the Premier League. But, I'd be the first to say, Portsmouth, when I was at the Premier League when that happened, it was a huge learning experience for us.
Well, I think, look, one of the... Sorry, go on.
I think, obviously Leeds is not in the Premier League, but, that does throw up lots of interesting challenges, because you've got a club where even the Football League doesn't like the ownership structure of the club, didn't want the owner to be able to buy the club. It ends up being up to the Italian Court of Appeal whether he owns it from one week to the next. And that's clearly a ludicrous situation. And I think we have to look then, if the sports don't feel they've got the legal power to do what they want, is there a role for government to provide some sort of statutory underpinning to a discretionary test on owners and directors of football clubs or other sports bodies as well?
So in an ideal world, you'd have liked the government to step in and say, Cellino, you can't be involved at Leeds United.
Well, I've proposed this. I proposed this in a private members' bill I brought before the House of Commons, that we should maybe look to give the FA powers almost akin to the sort of powers that Ofcom have over people that hold broadcasting licences. So Ofcom can apply as a discretionary test as to whether they think someone does comply with the broadcasting code or is likely to comply in the future. And if they don't believe they do, they can withdraw their licence. And in some extreme examples, they have done that, but that power is there and it's written into the Broadcasting Act. So if what sport feels is that it does, it is worried about legal challenge to the way it uses some of its powers and its discretion to protect the values of the sport of which it's a guardian, then maybe there is a role for government in providing some statutory underpinning for that.
And I think one of the challenges here is you end up with very lucrative events, which is where the money really drives from, where the IAAF get its money from being the owner of the World Championships. And all the sponsorship comes from sponsoring the World Championships at global IAAF level. FIFA's power comes from owning the Football World Cup. Everything else is incidental. In football in the UK, there's now a bifurcation between the Premier League, self-standing, 20 clubs, and the FA governing the sport. And we have to step back and absolutely recognise that and start to think about structures which enshrine events and then governance of grassroots and integrity for youngsters and all that stuff is maybe very clearly separate. And maybe football's getting in that direction. But we so often say, well, why doesn't the FA step in and sort that out? Well, actually, it doesn't have the power to do that. So the Premier League, those 20 clubs, have it in their own power to prevent a Leeds United ever getting promoted under Cellino, because the 20 clubs could sit there and say, actually, we collectively believe the health of our sport is stronger if we have those rules in place, because we are a club of our own. Now, in extremis, you end up with Formula One owned by one man, and that may or may not be a good thing. Probably not. I'm not a motor racing fan, but people would argue that is the case. But if you've got a sport which people genuinely engage in as the public, then you could go down the capitalist model and say it's event-driven. Everything else then can be left to grassroots governance structures. But so often we end up with problems where everything's mixed up as one. So the IAAF, I would suggest, a lot of its problems when it was governing the whole of the sport globally, from soup to nuts, rule book, eligibility, all the things that Seb was talking about, but really it had this honeypot at the middle of sponsorship and world championship assets, which allow corrupt people to cream off cash. The same may well be the case in FIFA. So maybe we should just address reality, and we could end up going, you and I were talking about it outside earlier, we could end up going down the extreme of, the top end of golf is owned by the players, the PGA Tour, the top end of tennis is owned by the players, while they are current players, and then governance of grassroots sport happens entirely separately. Maybe that's where we need to go, and maybe you end up with more Kerry Packer type challenges to existing structures. Maybe you could have a rival Football World Cup in which the top 16 nations got together and said, forget that. We've got financial backing here. Here's a new summer tournament. Could be club-based. There's all sorts of things that could happen. And I suspect if we spool forwards 10, 20, 30 years, the structure of events and the engagement of governing bodies with them will be entirely different. And a lot of the established structures will gradually break down.
So, Joan, it's a moving world. And people like the FA are just being left behind.
I'm not sure if that's fair about the FA. It is a moving world, definitely. I mean, I gave the example there about how things changed in the Premier League in the 10 years I was there in the governance field. We're writing this new code, which again will change things to the next level for sports governance in the UK. And when we were talking before, I think Ed made the point earlier, I said, it's like you have to be a meerkat. You kind of like that, looking for the next thing, the next challenge, because something will happen. And it won't always necessarily be a good thing, and you have to be able to react to that. And that also is, part of good governance. When there's an issue, when there's a problem, what are your processes, what are your structures, how do you react? Have you got a process that is credible, that is transparent, that people can have faith in, that will deliver a fair result?
I think I agree with John. I think it's a basket of issues you have to look at. There is a danger sometimes, I think, in sport where people have thought the measure of success is the commercial value of the broadcasting rights for the sport. And if that's going up, it must mean the sport is healthy. But that could mean, as people have been, this debate is happening in cricket at the moment. You could have matches being played in front of empty stadium and fewer people playing it. But as long as the broadcasting rights are going up, the people running the sport believe they're doing a good job.
And a load of people gambling on it.
Yeah, gambling, exactly. In the Far East, then it's a healthy sport. And it's not. It could have severe challenges that are being hidden by this mask of apparent commercial success. And I think with the Premier League, at the heart of one of the Premier League's commercial successes is a governance decision, which was the even distribution of broadcasting money. That has protected the quality of the competition, which is why people around the world want to watch it.
And without treading all over Jane's previous life, but there's lots of things about the governance structure of the Premier League that wouldn't tick the boxes of a UK Sport or Sport England ideal governance structure. You know, the role of Richard Scudamore, power in one hand, but some great decisions have been made.
Yeah, but I suppose then you have this balance between what is the role then of governing body? Because you still need a governing body whose job is to look at football in the round, you know, at all levels, and that the governance of the sport shouldn't just be driven by the most commercially successful competition format within it. And there is a role for a governing body, and I think
it's recognising what that role is, and not looking to the FA for the wrong things, looking to them for the right things. That is absolutely their objective.
So, and I do think hand in hand with commercial success, such as the Premier League's, comes the responsibility to be a good citizen. Be that by contributing to the grassroots sports, which I know the Premier League do substantially, or be it at club level, recognising the unique role you play as a club in your local community. You're often the only club in town, and you're often the kind of vehicle for people's feelings about their location, whether the town or the city is going through a good time or a bad time. You've got to be incredibly respectful of that. And I think that comes back to some of the points I was making earlier about knowing who your stakeholders are, looking after them properly, engaging with them properly, and that overarching point about guardianship and stewardship. So it's not just about, great, the sport's commercially successful, we can all take a nice share of that and live the life. There's huge responsibility with that.
Let's agree, some of the Premier League clubs are doing some fantastic things with their foundations, and I'm doing some work with Crystal Palace at the moment on how their foundation should roll forwards. But we've looked at some at Tottenham, for example, do amazing things in the local community with the funds that they raise themselves and flow through from the Premier League, and that needs to grow because as broadcast revenue grows, we need to see more money going into the Premier League's own foundation and going into the individual clubs' foundations.
But we had this panel yesterday about esports, a world that was completely new to me, which seems to be, in terms of governance, the Wild West, and yet it is incredibly healthy. It's growing like topsy. It's got huge revenues coming in, and it's growing in terms of participants. So isn't that suggesting maybe you don't need a central governance to a sport?
Well, I think they've got some of the problems of a classic startup. And I missed it yesterday, but I was aware of this and how popular esports has become, and it's kind of come from nowhere. And I would encourage them to think about their governance and get it right from the start.
So what would you say to them if they came to you and said, Jane, what should we be doing now? What would be the 3 principles you would tell them to go for?
Get the right board, make sure that you're incorporating transparency, independent check and challenge, which I think you mentioned, Damien, and looking at creating a kind of power structure, be that with a board and council or just a board that again reflects the stakeholder landscape that you deal with, that you recruit a board that is skills-based, people who have the competence to run this thing with some independent check and challenge in it. They're the main things. And there's lots of open source public materials that they can be signposted to help them.
What would you do if they came in front of the IFIOL committee?
Well, I think that in some ways the challenges are just the same. I mean, I think to what purpose is the sport being run? And I mean, if you look at sports governing bodies, what do? They oversee the rules of competitions, they exploit those competitions commercially, and then they redistribute the money that they get from it. So to what purpose are they doing that, and who's benefiting from it? And what ability is there to ensure that the competitions are being run with integrity and that the commercial decisions are being taken honestly and for the interests of the sport? And so I think if you had a new sport in front of the select committee that was commercially successful, you would say, well, demonstrate to me that you're doing these things in a good way, and if you're not, who are the people that are benefiting commercially from the way in which this sport is being developed, and are they the people that should be benefiting from it? So I think the same lessons apply.
You've been through some dark times in the last year or so, Ed. What would be your
I've sat in front of Damien and his colleagues on the select committee. It's an interesting experience. Actually, but the interesting experience for those that haven't been through it is realising that they're tweeting about your performance while you're still giving it. So,
and what did they say?
Well, they were quite nice, but they were, you can probably find them somewhere in an archive. But anyway, it's odd real time. It's probably like e-gaming, I guess. Look, I've got very broad shoulders. They carry a few knives in the back of them. But my view is that if you believe that you believe, double belief, if you believe that you believe in the right things for your sport, you have to stand up and speak about them. It may chop your career as a sporting administrator, but you owe it to yourself, but more importantly, you owe it to those engaging with your sport, participating in it and watching it to say the right thing. So I'll give you a good example. We published our manifesto for clean athletics, which Seb referenced earlier, back in January. You've got 14 ideas in it. Some of them are quite wacky. The only one which was entirely in our own gift as UK Athletics was to put in place a clause in our team members agreement that every British athlete signs when they come onto a British team. It's the same thing as you can't wear kit from a different sponsor, all that sort of stuff. We've added a clause that says, in joining this team for this event, if in future I'm ever convicted of a serious doping offence, I know I forfeit my right, and I agree I forfeit my right ever to being picked for Britain again. And every member of the team for the World Half Marathon Championships and the World Indoor Championships in Portland signed that agreement. I had any number of people telling me publicly and privately, you shouldn't do that, you can't make it stick, it's a double jeopardy. And we met as a board and decided we were putting that out there because we need to stand up for what's right for clean athletes and clean athletics. If in future, and Seb used the phrase, the court of public opinion, if in the future, heaven forbid, a British athlete does commit a serious doping offence, is banned, serves a ban, comes back, qualifies for the British team, we say, sorry, you signed an agreement back in 2016, you're not picked, and they challenge us in a court of law, I'll take that. Even if we lose, I think we'll win in the court of public opinion. But you had to stand up and do those things. And I do see too many people in the sporting panoply, not only internationally, but also in the UK, to go back to your very first question, who, to my mind, are too scared to stand up and say what is right. So we'll keep doing that, and it won't always make us popular.
Going to open it out to the floor. If you could just say who you are and wait for the microphone to come. Lady there.
Hi, I'm the CEO of Charlton Athletic. So actually, I was wondering, with regard to your question, what do you think is Charlton Athletic not doing in their corporate governance?
Me personally?
Yes.
Well, I didn't say that I thought that. I suggested I suggested the fans.
What a great journalist answer.
We're not happy. And I throw it back to you and say, why are the fans been protesting constantly this season? It can't simply be the fact that you've been demoted.
No, I mean, and that's a bit probably why I obviously haven't spoken to the media for a while, and because I'm advised against doing it. And I mean, if you compare us to Mr. Chilino, obviously there were issues about his director test, which is completely not the case with us. I think if it's about your role and the idea that you know what you need to look after your stakeholders, I mean, Charlton is famous for his work in the community. As an owner, we are investing £12 million into our academy, which is grassroots football, together with investing £2 million for a community trust and a rugby club, which will engage with 1,000 people every week in grassroots sports. So to speak, as a CEO, I probably, the last couple of months, I had 15 meetings with various of fans. And it's the perception. If you talk about governance, for me, it's the perception, obviously, to get the media to get it right. What is the issue at Charlton? And then, obviously, the protests with the fans. For 6 months, fans have protested at the Valley. Thousands of fans have protested. We allowed them to protest. None of the people got hurt. There was a tremendous investment for us on the stewarding and policing side. And also that we handled very well from a governance perspective. But being that all said, if you talk about governance in sport, me personally, for the last couple of months I've had extreme abuse. I had criminal offences committed to myself. And actually I'm disappointed about the governance in sport that none of the governing bodies basically contacted me and stood up for the fact that I think what happened as well with the Man United bus and so on, sometimes there are lines crossed, and as a governance body, sometimes it's also not set that things are not allowed, or that's one step too far.
So can I ask you what you've learned in the last 6 months that you can put into action next season?
Well, I mean, we listened to the fans. We are working more closer to the fans. Were you not listening to them before? Is that yes? We have, but I think it's a way of communication, and it's a perception that was created in the media, and it has escalated now. And
I think that's slightly exaggerating. I mean, the fans themselves were driving the protests, weren't they? It wasn't a media-driven protest.
No, I know, but it's when you just talked about the fact everything the last couple of months at the Valley was about the protest. It wasn't on what's going on about the pitch, and we need to change that perception. And for us, next season, just like the Olympics in Rio, will be for us vital to try to make it again on what happens on the pitch and not around the pitch. But we have put lots of things in place to engage with the fans. But I also ask to the governing bodies in this country is that sometimes some of the fans have crossed the line very far, and this is just accepted. It has been reported by the media as it's normal, and it's actually not. And I think the governing bodies in the UK also have a responsibility to make people aware that is not about what the sport is about. Sport should be a celebration of people coming together, and people that are not willing to do that, there should be also some measures against that.
Jane, do you agree that sometimes governing bodies leave their constituent members to drown alone?
Well, I think football is tricky, and you're not the first individual I've seen who has got the sharp end of the negative side of this extraordinary emotion that people invest into their clubs. I don't think there's an easy answer. If the fans have committed criminal behaviour, that's obviously a police matter. I'm not sure. I don't know whether it's a governing body matter, but I know it's difficult. And I could point to my first job in sport was working for Sunderland Football Club. In my second year there, they got relegated. The chairman was out one night with his wife in an extremely upmarket restaurant in Newcastle, and somebody smashed a glass and shoved it in his face. A fan. And the guy who did it was a professional man. It's extraordinary how people will behave. I've seen it. It's very, very difficult to handle. And I guess this is no comfort to you, I know, but we have to kind of accept that all that passion does drive the great things that we love, the full stadiums, the high revenues, etc.
Jamie?
I think governing bodies have a sort of obligation, I think, to their members. I'm not saying this is at all the view of the Premier League, but I think it would be wrong if the Premier League took the view, well, we're a very successful format, lots of clubs want to play in it. If one club gets broken and disappears, then just someone else will take their place and we just carry on making money. And that's why, so you could look, obviously, Portsmouth's a kind of extreme example. Blackpool is a kind of club in free fall, which is another example of that more recently. But I think the Premier League try and get around that with the parachute payments, to give people the opportunity to sort of have a go when they come up and have a soft landing when they come down. But I think financial fair play is important too, and I think it's one area where UEFA deserves some credit. I mean, financial fair play has only come in because UEFA insisted on it, and the Premier League was in a position where all of the Premier League clubs want to have a UEFA licence because they could qualify for UEFA competition, and therefore it's coming through the back door into England too. And I think you're not saying club has to make a profit every year, but in the round, the view that the club is being run in a sustainable manner and that the governing bodies play a role in helping the clubs through that process, I think is responsible.
Any more questions? Yeah. Go on there.
Hi there, Matt Campelli from Sports Management. I just wanted to pick up on Ed's comment earlier on about the male, pale and stale view of governing bodies. I think generally the sports governing bodies, the diversity and representation probably not as high as we'd like it to be. And I wonder how that tallies with your statement, Jane, about governance being good in UK sports governing bodies, and how UK sport and sporting will address this, really.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, Jim, sure. Okay. So, we currently have a kind of target for our governing bodies to have at least 25% of each gender, and I deliberately phrase it that way because we have some historically female sports where they've had to recruit some men to put on their boards, and we're kind of looking at that as part of our work for the new code, because let's face it, the population is 50-50, so do we need to do more? We're mindful also that that's not the only area that we need to look at to increase diversity. We need to look at how we get more black and minority ethnic people through into the leadership of sport, more disabled people. I think there's also something about socio-economic backgrounds that's interesting, and certain other sectors of society and industry have looked at this. For instance, I think the upper levels of the civil service they're very concerned about whether they're getting good socio-economic mix. So we know there's more to do. and we've got to do a bit of work and a bit of thinking about. It's a bit of a kind of push-pull exercise. You can set targets and say, everybody do this, but that's the pull bit. But you also need to do the push bit and make sure that you've got a talent pool of people coming through. And there is some good stuff out there, but some great work being done, in fairness, but we just need to make sure we're on track to do the right thing.
I mean, I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the current review into British cycling on the back of Shane Sutton's resignation, but it strikes me that British Cycling was one of the last of the major governing bodies in the UK to appoint a woman to the board. And we have a problem here which has arisen initially out of alleged treatment of a female cyclist. So let's see what the review throws up. But yeah, British Cycling was always heralded as a great shining beacon of sporting success at Olympic and Paralympic level. But behind that, its governance seemed to me, as someone governing another sport, to be rather slow to follow the model. And now this has all come through, so let's see what the review throws up. But to my mind, it is absolutely critical that you have diversity of talents, backgrounds, perspectives on a board, and we've worked very hard at UK Athletics to ensure that we do embrace that, and we have delivered it.
If I could say really simply as well, I mean, I think this is also a role, I think this is an opportunity for the government's new charter for sports governance for domestic sports that receive public funding to sort of, I think, make these issues a criteria as part of that funding.
I'm going to have to wrap it up there. We're going to take a break in the coffee bar upstairs, a networking opportunity. Lady from Charlton Athletic is going to grab hold of me, I'm sure. I'd just love to say thank you very much to Ed, Jane and Damien for an absolutely fantastic opening panel for today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.